Hare Krishna. So here's a classic question we get a lot in yoga. If non-violence is so important, if peace, I mean, you think of spirituality, you think of peace and non-violence, it's so important. Why does Krishna ask Arjuna to fight in the Bhagavad-Gita? It bewilders people because they think, because you see clearly in the Bhagavad-Gita, Arjuna saying, no, I don't want to fight. And Krishna saying, no, you have to fight. And people are like, why is this happening? So it's very important. There's a very good reason why the Bhagavad-Gita happens in a battlefield. So the Bhagavad-Gita is this conversation between Krishna and Arjuna in a battlefield, in a battle about to start, the biggest battle of the times. And Arjuna doesn't want to fight, even though he was a warrior and he'd been a warrior his whole life, because by that time he was already like 60 years old. He'd been around for a while. He didn't look old. It's like the Lord of the Rings, Aragorn. He didn't look old, but he was 60. He was, 60 or 70 years old. And he was a great fighter. But he didn't want to fight that particular battle of Kurukshetra because on the other side, on the enemy side, were a lot of his family members, cousins and uncles, and even his grandfather. So he didn't want to fight them because it was a little bit too personal. It was too much like he had to kill people he knew. He'd been fighting his whole life. He didn't mind killing like other enemies he didn't know, but that one was like the American Civil War, like you had sometimes brothers fighting on different sides, so it gets a little weird. But why does Krishna tell him to fight? Because it was his Dharma, it was Arjuna's Dharma to fight. Why? Because the other side, the enemies, the Kurus, led by Duryodhana, his cousin, his evil cousin, they had taken the control of the government. Basically, it had been, a coup, a military coup, and they had taken control of the government decades ago, and they weren't willing to relinquish it and let the Pandavas, who were the real, just rulers of the country, they weren't letting the Pandavas assume their position as the rulers, as the ruling dynasty. And so it was Arjuna's Dharma, it was his duty to reestablish the constitution, as it were. Imagine if your country was invaded by another country, like let's go back to the Second World War, if you're like your country gets invaded by the Nazis, it's your duty to fight. You have to fight, especially if you're one of the military commanders of your country. It's your duty to fight. It doesn't matter if all of a sudden, it just so happens that the Nazis are your cousins or your uncle's a Nazi. It doesn't matter. It's still your duty to fight to protect the constitution of your country, to protect you from that ruling party which is taking control over by force and not by law. So it was Arjuna's duty to fight, and the whole point of the Bhagavad-Gita, the whole point of yoga is to understand that you should do your dharma, your duty, no matter how pleasant or unpleasant it is. And that's one of the main instructions of the Bhagavad-Gita and of the path of yoga. So the fact that it was unpleasant, to say the least, to have to kill cousins and uncles and even your grandfather who are on the opposing side of the war, that is irrelevant from the point of view of yoga. It's irrelevant because if it's your duty, you have to do it. The example I usually give to bring it more closer to our reality is this. Imagine you're a cop, you're a police person, and there's a break-in, alarms go off, you get called, and you arrive there, and as you get to the crime scene, it's your cousin stealing. It's your cousin coming out of the store with like a TV under his arm or something. So what would be the right thing to do? Say, oh, come on, Johnny. Seriously, man? All right, just go, but just don't do it again. Go. That happens in a lot of places. But no, of course, that would be completely wrong. The dharma of that police person is just, look, you got to draw Johnny. Doesn't matter if you're my cousin, I love you, but you screwed up. Put the TV down, spread your hands, you have the right to remain silent. That's the correct thing to do. It's completely unpleasant. It's completely unpleasant. I mean, it's your cousin or your brother, or it doesn't matter. You don't want to do it, but you have to do it because it's your dharma. And that was Arjuna's situation. It was unpleasant, but it was his dharma. He was doing the right thing. He was being morally and ethically correct in defending the country's constitution, in reestablishing the legitimate government, and pushing away the evil military coup that had happened from his evil cousin Duryodhana. So that's why Arjuna is propelled to fight in the Bhagavad-Gita with his mind in the here and now as an offering to the divine. And that's why Krishna was telling him to do that, because that was the correct thing to do. That was the dharmic action to do. Hare Krishna.